بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. ما بعد. Alhamdulillah, we spoke in quite detail regarding the Niyyah so far and regarding the Hadith, and we still have some more details, some more abhath and subjects regarding the Niyyah left. So let's continue. So today we'll be speaking about the levels of Niyyah. So we know Niyyah itself is intention, but the scholars have broken that down even further, just so they can understand how it works and when we will be rewarded or punished, etc., for our niyyahs. So this is really amazing that they went into so much further detail. And in reality, it was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam who also told us about these things. So it really prompted the scholars to go further and go and investigate. So let's look at some of these levels. The scholars of fiqh state that there are multiple levels of decision and intention. So number one is called Hajis. Hajis in Arabic, it literally means something that suddenly comes. Hajis, to come suddenly. So this is the very basic level that appears to a person, a thought that suddenly appears in the mind. It is not done through one's intention, is not something that a person decides. It just comes up. And this happens to everyone. A human being is always in some level of thought. Either they're willfully thinking, contemplating, pondering over something, that is to use one's mind, or they're going through one of these stages, or at the least they're going through hajis. Maybe when a person is sleeping, even then their mind is working. So hajis is when a thought suddenly appears in the mind without any prompt, without a person doing anything to control it or bring it about. Number two is Khatir. And Khatar in Arabic also means to come to someone. It doesn't mean to come suddenly, but it means to happen. So if something happens, it's called Khatar in Arabic. And there's many other meanings of Khatar as well, but this is the meaning that we are taking here. And a Khatir is an idea. So many of you may have heard of, Masjid, a Khatira is basically when someone stands up after the salah and reminds us of something good. So that's where that word comes from. Khatira, or a remembrance, is actually an idea. It's a very brief reminder for us. So this is where it comes from. The second level of thought is, or second level of niyyah, is a khatir, or an idea. So this is when the hajis remains for a period of time. So, i.e. the hajis is not removed. So the hajis, we said, was a sudden thought that comes without a person's will. And a khatir is when it stays in the mind. So a person can, ideally, if it's a negative hajis, negative thought, they can remove that when it's at that first level. And if they don't, then it stays a little bit longer and it turns into a khatir. So that is the second level. The third level is called hadith un-Nafs. And this I have translated as contemplation, but literally hadith means to speak, or it's something that is spoken, and nafs is the self. It is when the self speaks to itself. So we all have that voice in our head. So the voice in our head is called the hadith un-Nafs. So we'll talk to ourselves when we decide things. This is more of a willful, close to being willful type of idea or a niyyah. So I translated that as contemplation. This is when the khatir remains. And the khatir this is basically the third level. It remains and one begins to contemplate whether or not to perform the action. So this is basically in the middle. Then you go to Hamm. Hamm means desire. In Surah Yusuf, we see the word being used for the wife of the Aziz, as well as Yusuf alayhi salam. He would have had Hamm if it was not for the proof of his Lord. So this word is used in the Quran. And Hamm actually means, it means desire. It can also mean an inclination. It can also mean to be anxious, a type of anxiety. So we can see when we have a desire for something, or when the hum is being formed within ourselves, there's a type of anxiety that happens. Something changes within us. So this word hum, it's developing. The action is developing. All of these, basically, they're not actions, but you can actually feel, if you really contemplate over it and think where my action started from, you can actually go and see these different stages. So the hum, or the desire, when one prefers performing an action over its avoidance. So now your hadith un-Nafs was in the middle. That was, should I do it or not? Hum becomes, now I am actually considering doing it. And finally, you have azam. So azam with the ayn is to resolve. That is when you are certain. One is certain they will perform the action. So these are 5 different levels of the niyyah that the scholars have mentioned. Again, Hajis is the initial thought that appears in the mind, just pops into the mind. And definitely a Hajis will, or our actions will affect our Hajis, right? It's not that it's completely arbitrary, that random thoughts come into the mind. The actions that we have done in the past definitely has an influence over what types of Hajis that will pop up in our mind. So if we're used to doing good actions, if we're used to performing salah, doing dhikr, reciting Quran, keeping our minds clean, then the hajjus that we'll get will likely be clean as well. And if we're not used to doing those things, and we're used to surrounding ourselves with negative media, negative things, reading negative, looking at negative, speaking negative, if our surrounding thoughts and everything around us is negative, then the different hajjuses that will come to us in the future will likely be negative as well. So, I mean, if a person is not a believer, then it's probably likely he won't get a hajjus of doing some salah or, some type of a'mal, because he's not a believer. But if a person is used to just performing a lot of good ta'at and ibadat in his life or her life, then likely the good hajjus will come. He won't have, a negative hajjus of, drinking or doing drugs or this and that. So we do have a certain type of effect over the hajjus that are brought to us. So, and so we have hajjus, the thought, Khatir, it's an idea, it's forming in our mind. Hadith un-Nafs, it formed so much in our mind that now the idea is there, and now we're considering, should I do it or not? And then Hamm is when we prefer performing the action. Now I want to do it, I would like to do it. Azam is basically the only thing stopping me from doing it is that it didn't happen. So Azam is basically that strong level of Niyyah. So these are all the different stages of Niyyah. Okay, now how do these apply? So these are some rulings on how these different stages of the Niyyah apply to us. Regarding a sin, a person will not be held accountable for Hajis because it appeared in his or her mind without their own accord. So that is good. There was an incident where the Sahaba were told that there was an ayah, a verse that was revealed that says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows your thoughts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware of everything that you do. So because of this, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was saying that all the thoughts are known to Allah, the Sahaba became very scared because they knew that these were certain things that they could not always control. certain times a thought would come to their mind, and they would basically remove that thought, but it would come to their mind. And when they found out that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be judging them based off of those, they became very scared. Then they came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then they explained how they were so scared. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam told them, and the verse was revealed where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that la yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not burden anyone more than they can handle. So to judge us based on our Hajis would be difficult. And so out of the rahmah, the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does not judge us based off of our Hajis. So this is a big mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to, He could have definitely taken us to account for our Hajis. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself says that this is very difficult for a person to control. La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not burden a person for that which they cannot handle. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself tells us that we cannot control this. So no matter what we're in the state of thinking. So if a person has a negative Hajis, the first level, the thought just popped into their mind of a negative idea, a negative thought, a negative action, that it just popped in their mind, they will not be accountable, inshallah. Number 2 is the Khatir and Hadith un-Nafs. So, like we said, Khatir is when the Hajis stays for a little bit, and Hadith un-Nafs is basically the intermediary stage where a person considers, should I do it or not? So for Khatir and Hadith un-Nafs, they could be removed with the person's will. So if the Hajis is basically, it will come. So we cannot stop it from coming, but once it is there in our minds, we have the ability to remove that. So if a person's will is strong, they can remove it at the source. If it's a negative thought, this is regarding a sin. If it's negative, we can remove it when it's a Khatir. And if it keeps on going, Hadith un-Nafs definitely, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the tawfiq, and this really is a great ni'mah from Allah for those people who can remove their Khatir and Hadith un-Nafs, because they don't let it get to the further stages. So a person can remove that with their will. But if they did not remove it, then normally they should be held accountable, because this is something that they are actually choosing to do. Hajis is not a choice. Khatir starts becoming a choice. Hadith un-Nafs is definitely a choice. You are aware of what's happening in your mind. So we are able to remove that. So in theory, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should take us to account on this. If we have a negative Khatir and we have a negative Hadith un-Nafs, then in theory, because we are in control, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have taken us to account. However, it's a ni'mah from Allah that it's not recorded. It's automatically forgiven. This is a huge ni'mah, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could easily take us to account over our thoughts, because we have control over that. So there's a hadith from Sunan Ibn Majah on the authority of Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu. He said that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Inna Allah tajawaza li ummati amma haddathat bihi anfusuha ma lam ta'mal bihi aw takallama bihi." Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forgiven my ummah for that which their selves speak to them about, as long as they don't act upon that and as long as they don't speak about it. So as long as we don't bring these khatirs and Hadith un-Nafs into action, we don't bring it out, we don't act on it, either by physically doing something or speaking about it, because speaking is an action as well. If we speak well, if we do dhikr, if we recite the Quran, we get rewarded. If we speak bad, we use vulgar language, we speak about doing sin, that is a sin as well. La yuhibbullahu al-jahra bis-su'. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not prefer that you speak about negative things. Illa man zulim, except for a person that is oppressed and he needs to express what is being done upon him or her. So here, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives us for Hadith un-Nafs, and if Hadith un-Nafs is mentioned, then definitely Khatir is also forgiven. So this is a great ni'mah that we should do shukr for, and the way we do shukr is to control our thoughts. as much as possible. It doesn't mean that now that Khatir and Hadith un-Nafs is forgiven, so I should entertain these ideas that pop into my mind. If we start entertaining them, then they definitely will evolve and get stronger. This is something that is very difficult to control. It's even difficult for us to evaluate which stage the thought is in. I'm sure with a lot of practice, some people will be able to do that, but it's extremely difficult. So if you entertain ideas, they definitely will get to that further stage and eventually come to fruition and become an action. Okay, next point. Similarly, if these three stages were to be for a deed or a good action in amal, that deed won't be recorded because it's not an intention yet. So these three stages, they're not considered intention yet. Because an intention is leaning towards doing something, that cancels out Hadith un-Nafs, which is exactly in the middle. And if Hadith un-Nafs is not counted, then Khatir as well as Hajis definitely are not counted. So that's why these three stages in terms of good deeds are not counted, as well as sin. So this is a great ni'mah in terms of the sin not being recorded. And for a deed, we didn't do anything, so really it's not going to be recorded. So considering a deed, like should I do it or not, that's not considered a deed. If we are here thinking that, hey, should I recite Quran? Should I donate? Should I do something? We're not going to get rewarded for that until we said, yes, I'm going to do it. Then if something stops us, you still got that intention recorded for yourself. Okay, so that's the middle stage. Now, next point, when one does Hamm, and remember, Hamm is when we start considering doing the action over not doing it. So we actually have given what's called tarjih, or we have given preference to doing the action. So when we prefer to do the action, that's called Hamm. So when one does Hamm of a good deed, it will be recorded as a deed, right? Because now you have decided, hey, I'm going to do it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala records it, has it recorded as a good deed because you have actually intended it. Now it's an intention. However, when one does Hamm of a sin, then it will not be recorded as a sin. This is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is really amazing that when you intend doing a deed in the very early stages of intention, which is Hamm, then it's recorded as a deed. But if you intend the same thing for a sin, then it's not recorded. Let's look at a hadith from Sahih al-Bukhari, recorded from Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma, عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فيما يروي عن ربه عز وجل. This is a hadith Qudsi that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam narrates that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قال إن الله كتب الحسنات والسيئات ثم بين ذلك. So Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala records good deeds, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala records sins, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explained to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, فَمَنْ هَمَّ بِحَسَنَةٍ فَلَمْ يَعْمَلْهَا كَتَبَهَا اللَّهُ لَهُ عِنْدَهُ حَسَنَةً كَامِلَةً. If a person does Hamm or intends a hasana, a good action, and they did not perform the good action, they intended it but they didn't perform it, كَتَبَهَا اللَّهُ لَهُ عِنْدَهُ حَسَنَةً كَامِلَةً. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will write for that individual a good reward. So it's recorded for that person. He did a good thing. He didn't practice upon it yet. He intended it. So it's a good reward. It's recorded down. فإن هو هم بها فعملها كتبها الله له عنده 10 حسنات إلى 700 ضعف إلى أضعاف كثيرة. If a person excuse me, if a person did Hamm of a good action and performed the action, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will have it recorded as 10 good deeds. So remember, just intending, you get 1. By doing it, you get 10 good deeds. إلى 700 ضعف, up to 700, up to even more than that. So in this hadith Qudsi, we know that by doing a good deed, automatically we will get 10 rewards. And depending on our intentions, depending on our ikhlas, depending on other factors that we have in our control, and we should really consider these factors when performing a'mal, that 10 could be multiplied up to 700, and that 700 can be multiplied even more. إلى أضعاف كثيرة, more multiples. That's what that means. So this is in regards to good deeds. So this is a great ni'mah. وَمَنْ هَمَّ بِسَيِّئَةٍ فَلَمْ يَعْمَلْهَا. If a person does hum or intends of a sin and does not practice upon that sin, he does not commit the sin, كَتَبَهَا اللَّهُ لَهُ عِنْدَهُ حَسَنَةً كَامِلَةً. This person intends a sin but doesn't do it, meaning they stop themselves, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not record the sin. Rather, that person will get a good deed. He intended that he is going to do a sin, but he stopped himself because of the fear of Allah or because he knows that it's a sin, then this person gets a deed. So this is really amazing. This is the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَإِنْ هُوَ هَمَّ بِهَا فَعَمِلَهَا كَتَبَهَا اللَّهُ لَهُ سَيِّئَةً وَاحِدَةً. If that person does intend a sin and then finally acts upon that, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will record one sin. So look, measure the two. How much is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rahmah and mercy over us? I don't think there's any example of this in the dunya where you work for, let's say, for 1 hour, then you're going to get 10 times your ajr, your reward, your pay. And if you skip a day, then you won't have, nothing will happen. The opposite is true. If you skip a day and you keep doing that, you're going to get fired. So here, this is amazing hadith recorded in Sahih al-Bukhari that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His mercy is shown. So to recap, if we intend a good action and we do not perform the action, but we really did intend it, and obviously we cannot play games with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah knows if we really intended or not. So we can't say, this is what I intended, and really in our hearts we know that we didn't intend it. Allah obviously knows. So if you really intend on doing a good deed, it will be written as a single reward. Then if we practice upon it, we're going to get a minimum of 10 rewards. This is in the Quran. مَنْ جَاءَ بِالْحَسَنَةِ فَلَهُ عَشْرُ أَمْثَالِهَا. A person who does one good deed, it will be multiplied by 10. So a minimum of 10, and it can go up to 700 and even further than that, depending on those factors. And those are the chosen slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who can really get up to the high mark. And that's why in one hadith, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that in comparison of the later people that will come to my Sahaba, if those people of later generations spend Mount Uhud in gold, if they had that much gold like the mountain and they spent it, then it would not equal the mud, which is a very small unit of measure, maybe like a liter. It will not equal the liter, that amount of my Sahaba when they spent. And this is why, because the Sahaba, when they would perform a'mal, it will get multiplied by 700 or more than that. So this is where Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says in that hadith that if you try to spend Mount Uhud in gold, it won't equal their small amount. So this is a great rahmah from Allah. This is why we should try hard with our niyyah. And then if a person intends to do a sin, but they did not do that, they stop themselves because of the fear of Allah. That's important. We should stop ourselves because of the fear of Allah. Then it will be written as a good deed. Now, if someone is stopped because of some other issue, they were not able to, fulfill that action, then it's not the same here. And then if a person does finally act upon it, he does do the sin, then it will be written as a sin. Okay, the last stage, azam. Azam, the scholar, azam means resolve. That's when there's nothing stopping you other than doing the sin, meaning physically getting involved. It's basically you're going to do it, it's just you haven't done it yet. So regarding azam, scholars say that deeds and sins will both be recorded. So if a person does do azam, they're basically going to do the action and then something stops them. Let's say they're just stopped because of, maybe they pass away before they do it. Then they were going to perform it. So that's going to be recorded as that sin. This is what some scholars say. There is probably a difference of opinion in this regard, but this is what we have recorded here. If a person refrains from a negative azam, then they'll be rewarded. So if a person is thinking negatively, and they're definitely going to do it, something happens in between where it stops them from doing it. And that something is the fear of Allah. If they're motivated by the fear of Allah and they stop and they were 100% in their mind they were going to do it, they're not even considering. It's just the time hasn't happened yet. But somewhere along the line, they stop due to the fear of Allah, then that's a great reward actually. And, theoretically, they would get a higher reward from if they had not done a hum, because stopping a azam is harder than stopping a hum. So theoretically, they would get more reward. This is if they purposely stopped themselves after it reached the level of azam out of the fear of Allah. Then there are scholars who say that in azam for a sin is a lower level than performing the sin. So if a person performs a sin, that's obviously, it has been manifested, the person did the action. That's a greater sin than if a person just had azam of a sin and they did not perform the sin. But contemplating it so much that it's on the level of azam, it would be considered a sin. So these are different points in regards to the levels of niyyah. This is why it's so important as a believer, we should keep our minds as clean as possible and think of good things. It's quite important because if we fill our minds with good thoughts, inshallah, good actions will be a result of that. And if we fill our minds with negative thoughts, negative actions, then definitely a negative action will come out of that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us for His a'mal, for His worship. So we should definitely reflect that in our thoughts. And we should remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can see our thoughts clearly, more clearly than we can see our own thoughts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is completely aware of what we think. Okay, so now we have some advice of Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah ta'ala. He's a great scholar in the past, was a student of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, and he was sort of a philosopher. Like, he would speak so amazingly in a lot of his books. There's a lot of great advices. So regarding this, he has some advices. And I usually don't translate to Arabic, but I thought that for this I would translate it because it's just really amazing advices from him and life-changing advices that we can really apply. And inshallah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us tawfiq to apply this to change our outlook on life. And it gives us an idea how a mu'min or a believer, how their thoughts should be organized, how they should think, how they should react with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here he says, دافع الخطرة فإن لم تفعل صارت فكرة فدافع الفكرة فإن لم تفعل صارت شهوة فحاربها فإن لم تفعل صارت عزيمة وهمة فإن لم تدافعها صارت فعلا فإن لم تداركه بضده صار عادة فيصعب عليك الانتقال عنها. The translation is, drive away the evil thought, for if you do not, it will become an idea. So the khatrah, the khatir, when it comes to our minds, and not just a hajis, but a khatir, it stays there for a bit, we should remove it. So he's saying remove the khatir at the early stages when you have the ability, not the hajis because we don't have that ability, but the khatir, when it comes, remove it at that point. That is the best thing that you can do. This is in regards to an evil thought or a negative thought. If you don't do that, it's going to become an idea. It's going to get to the level of a fikrah, which is on hadīth un-Nafs. Fikrah here is hadīth un-Nafs. It becomes an idea. Should I do it or not? So drive it away while it's still a khatrah. Then if you do not do so, drive away the idea, the hadīth un-Nafs. For if you do not, it will become a desire. It'll become a hum. So if you don't remove the hadīth un-Nafs, you're considering, should I do it, should I not? Then it'll become a hum. It'll become, now I do want to do it. I would like to do it now. And then he says, wage war with your desires. Now it becomes, you can see in his language how it's changing. As the thought develops, a stronger response is required. So he says, wage war with the desire. For if you do not, it will become a resolve. It'll become an azam. So you don't want that to happen. So now the desire is like, I do want to do it. And then if you don't stop it there, if you don't wage war with yourself at that moment, then it becomes, I'm gonna do it. Then if you don't drive it away at this stage, it's gonna become an action. That's the niyyah is complete. Now the only next stage is the fi'l, the action. Either it's gonna become amal or it's gonna become a sin. If it's leaning towards the sin, it's gonna be very difficult now. If you don't recover from that action, so basically the person has done the action, then he says if you don't recover from that action by performing an opposite good action, it'll become a habit. This is important because in one hadith, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, وَأَتْبِعِ سَيِّئَةَ الْحَسَنَةَ تَمْحُهَا. If you do a sin, if you do something wrong, follow it up with a good deed. That good deed will remove the effect of that sin. So here Imam Ibn al-Qayyim is saying that if it became a sin, you actually did it, then recover from that by doing the opposite good action. And if you don't, it's going to become a habit because you're going to just keep doing it. If you don't recover from it, you're going to do it again because you enjoyed it. You're going to do it again after that. And then once you've done it enough times, it will become a habit. And then it'll be very difficult to free yourself from it. So these are some amazing advices. Then he says, وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ مَبْدَأَ كُلِّ عِلْمٍ اخْتِيَارِ هو الخواطر والأفكار فإنها توجب التصورات والتصورات تدعو إلى الإرادات والإرادات تقتضي وقوع الفعل وكثرة تكراره تعطي العادة فصلاح هذه المراتب بصلاح الخواطر والأفكار وفسادها بفسادها. He says, understand that the beginning of every pondered concept and purposeful action, meaning everything that you are purposefully thinking or purposefully doing, that came from a thought or an idea. So it came from a thought or an idea. That was the origin of all of these things. Things that we do every day, or anything that comes from us. Any purposeful thoughts, any physical actions, all of those started off as a thought and an idea. So those thoughts and ideas turn into illustrations in one's mind. We start seeing pictures in our minds. We start seeing it turns into the process of hadīth un-Nafs and so on and so forth. The illustrations in our minds become intentions. Then the intentions call for an action. Continuous actions turn into habits. Therefore, the rectification of actions and habits, so if we want to fix our actions, we want to fix our habits, this lies in the rectification of thoughts and ideas. And the corruption of actions and habits lies in corrupt thoughts and ideas. So he's basically getting at our problems at the root. If we want to have goodness in our lives, sometimes we wonder, how come I can't do that? How come I'm not praying extra, or I'm not performing my 5 times salah? How come I find it so difficult? Then Imam Ibn al-Qayyim is not even giving small solutions. He's saying go back to the source. It goes all the way back to our thoughts. If we're having good thoughts, it's going to have a good outcome. We're going to do good actions. If we have negative thoughts, those are going to turn into negative actions. More advices. فصلاح الخواطر بأن تكون مراقبة لوليها وإلهها صاعدة إليه دائرة على مرضاته ومحابه فإنه سبحانه به كل صلاح ومن عنده كل هدى ومن توفيقه كل رشد ومن توليه لعبده كل حفظ ومن تولي العبد وإعراضه عنه كل ضلال وشقاء. So Imam Ibn al-Qayyim is saying, now he's telling us what is the rectification of thoughts. In the previous advice, he was telling us that if you want to have salah or piety, it goes back to the thoughts. You're supposed to have pious thoughts. Now, what are pious thoughts? What are good thoughts? Rectification of thoughts is through the remembrance of the creator of the thoughts, and it's God. Meaning, the more you do dhikr or remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is rectification of thoughts. Thoughts which are elevated, meaning, ascended thoughts, really good thoughts. which revolve around the pleasure of Allah. These are good thoughts, thoughts that revolve around the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the rectification of thoughts. This is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the source of all rectification and piety. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the source of goodness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the source of salah or rectification. It is from Allah that all guidance emanates. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the giver of guidance. That's why we ask only Allah. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ اهْدِنَا الصِّرَاطَ الْمُسْتَقِيمُ. We're asking Allah for guidance. And it is from His gift of ability, it is from the tawfiq of Allah that all good exists. If we want to do good, we first have to receive the tawfiq of Allah, the gift from Allah to do the action. Then we can do it. It is by handing affairs to Allah that the slave is completely protected. And by taking our affairs in our own hands and turning away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be the misguidance and misfortune of the slave. So basically in these two lines, Imam Ibn al-Qayyim is saying that we need to have good thoughts in order to have good actions. Good thoughts is to do dhikr, remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and always try to please Allah. If our goal in life is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then naturally all of these things will happen. Remember, every one of us has a goal. Whether we know it or we don't know it, we're working towards something. Our actions reflect that. So many of us, our ultimate goal, like, we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we believe in Islam. However, we have not trained ourselves. So now our thoughts revolve around pleasing ourselves. So throughout the day, if we just observe our actions, we can tell what is our goal. Is my goal the pleasure of Allah, or is my goal pleasing myself? If my actions revolve around having fun, revolve around self-gratification, then that shows that in reality, my goal is not the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's actually pleasing my nafs. So Imam Ibn al-Qayyim is saying that if your true goal is to please Allah, then naturally your actions would become good. Then he continues, وَعَلَمْ أَنَّ الْخَطَرَاتِ وَالْوَسَاوِسِ تُؤَدِّي مُتَعَلِّقَاتِهَا إِلَى الْفِكْرِ فيأخذها الفكر فيؤدي إلى التذكر فيأخذها التذكر فيؤديها إلى الإرادة فتأخذها الإرادة فتؤديها إلى الجوارح والعمل فتستحكم فتصير عادة فردها من مبادئها أسهل من قطعها بعد قوتها وتمامها. So he says here, understand that thoughts and whispers lead to ideas. So, the Hajis, this is what he's talking about. These whispers, very quickly, subtle, brief thoughts that come into our minds, the Hajis, they lead to ideas, which is ultimately hadith un-Nafs. Ideas will become oft remembered, or the Hajis turns into the Khatir, and the Khatir here will become oft remembered, meaning it will turn into the hadith un-Nafs. When it is often remembered, it will become an intention. He's repeating basically what he said. It will become a Hamm or a azam. The intention will take the idea and turn it into action. When done frequently, it'll become a habit. Removing it in the beginning is much easier than cutting it off when it is strong and in a phase of completion. So when your irada, when your intention has become so strong, it became a azam, now it's very difficult. The word itself, resolve, means that you can't stop me, I'm going to do it. So now that in itself, the definition is that I'm going to do it, I cannot be stopped. Stopping that is very difficult. So he's saying that, don't cause yourself so much difficulty. Just get rid of it from the beginning. We have to use our intellect. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us iman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us intellect so that we can wage war with these thoughts that come in. And remember, a lot of these thoughts come from shayateen. They come from shaitan, they come from shayateen. We cannot see them. They can see us and they can influence us. Some of them come from the nafs, some of them come from the shayateen. And subhanAllah, the ulama have mentioned how we can differentiate what comes from the self, the nafs, and what comes from shaitan. And they have a lot of information regarding that, some signs about that. Okay, now, inshallah, he's going to keep giving us more advices. Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وَمَعْلُومٌ أَنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَمْ يُعْطَى إِمَاتَةَ الْخَوَاطِرِ ولا القوة على قطعها فإنها تهجم عليه هجوم النفس إلا أن قوة الإيمان والعقل تعينه على قبول أحسنها ورضاه به ومساكنته له وعلى دفع أقباحها وكراهته له ونفرته منه. So he's saying that it is known that man has not been given the ability to prevent his thoughts from happening nor remove them completely. So we're unable to do that. You cannot get rid of Hajis. The mind is always working. Hajis will definitely happen. We will not be able to remove ourselves from the Hajis. So that's what he's saying here. They come to him over and over just like his breath. So our breath is not something that we think about. It's not something that we do willfully. If we breathed willfully, we'd die when we go to sleep. So in the same manner, our Hajis are like our breath. So even while we're sleeping, the Hajis are occurring. We just forget them when we wake up, and sometimes we remember them as dreams. However, with the strength of faith and intellect, Iman and Aql, faith and intellect, a person is aided in choosing the best of them. So we have, through Iman, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us that ability to differentiate. Is this good? Is this bad? Is this going to please Allah? Is this going to displease Allah? And we have the ability through intellect. Just by being a human being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the intellect that if you choose this good thought, then you can succeed. So with these two things, and this is where the believer surpasses everyone else. Now we have to ask ourselves that are we really using this? This is the strength of the believer. When the believer uses their faith with intellect, they can surpass all other people because they are on the Sirat al-Mustaqim. So here, with the strength of faith and intellect, a person is aided in choosing the best thought. So we have so many Hajis, we can choose the best of them. Like I mentioned earlier, if we are in the habit of doing good actions, usually our Hajis will be good. And when it gets to the Khatir stage, even if it's a negative Hajis, we can remove the Khatir, and then a good Hajis will come, and we can entertain that Khatir. If it's a good Khatir, we entertain it because that's going to ultimately evolve into a good action. And we can be pleased with them, meaning we can be happy with a good Khatir. If a good Khatir comes, a good idea, then we should be happy. Alhamdulillah, I got a good idea, and entertain that good idea, raise it until it becomes into the state of fruition, it becomes amal. And we can be in a state of tranquility regarding good thoughts. And the person, the mu'min, the believer, has the ability to remove the worst of them, meaning the worst Khatir, and can be displeased with bad Khatir and be disgusted with them too. So that is something really important. We see in the dua of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqa warzuqna ittiba'ah wa arina al-batila batilan warzuqna ijtinabah. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Oh Allah, show us the truth as the truth and allow us to follow it, and show us falsehood as falsehood and give us tawfiq to stay away from it." So this all is tawfiq from Allah, but it happens with our own decisions and choices as well. So we have that ability to remove the worst khatirs, and if you remove a bad khatir, then eventually a good khatir will come. And we can be displeased with bad khatirs and disgusted with bad khatirs. This is a big ni'mah from Allah, to be happy with good a'mal and displeased with bad a'mal. This is a huge ni'mah that we should make dua for. If a person has that, then basically everything that comes from that person is going to be khair, because they're disgusted with bad a'mal, they're not going to get involved. Finally, the last piece of advice is where Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, he gives a tashbih, or an example, very beautiful example. He said, وَقَدْ خَلَقَ اللَّهُ سُبْحَانَهُ النَّفْسَ شَبِيهَةً بِالرَّاحَةِ الدَّائِرَةِ التي لا تسكن ولا بد لها من شيء تطحنه فإن وضع فيها حب طحنته وإن وضع فيها تراب أو حصى طحنته فالأفكار والخواطر التي تجول في النفس هي بمنزلة الحب الذي يوضع في الراحة ولا تبقى تلك الراحة معطلة قط بل لا بد لها من شيء يوضع فيها فمن الناس من تطحن رحاه حبا يخرج دقيقا ينفع به نفسه وغيره وأكثرهم يطحن رملا وحصى وتبنا ونحو ذلك فإذا جاء وقت العجن والخبز تبين له حقيقة طحينه. This is very beautiful what he said. He says here, Allah Ta'ala has created the self, the nafs, like a round grindstone. A grindstone is what they used in the past where they would put seeds, they would put different things that they needed to grind, and they would churn it. You have one piece that is very heavy on the floor, and another piece with a handle on top is basically two flat slabs of stone. And the top piece will have a handle, and you would churn it in a circle, and that would grind up all the stones and all the seeds and whatever wheat or other things that you wanted to grind, and eventually you will have flour or other things that are necessary in a ground state. So this is what they used to use before. So he is comparing, Imam Ibn al-Qayyim is comparing the nafs, the self, to a grindstone. And this grindstone never sits still. It always requires something to grind. So, our nafs, our minds, our inner self, it always needs something there. It's never empty. If you think about it, from the day you're born till the day you die, your mind is never empty. Even when you sleep, you may not remember it, but there's something in there. It always requires something to grind, this grindstone. It's always churning. If grains are placed in it, it'll grind it. And if dirt or rocks are placed in it, it'll grind it. So no matter what, it's moving. It's moving in a circular fashion. The only thing that you can do is put either grains inside, put wheat inside, or you can throw rocks inside. You can throw useless things inside. You can throw sticks inside. That's the only thing that we have. That's our ability. Thus, ideas and thoughts, which are constantly in one's mind, are like grains which are placed in the grindstone. We choose ultimately what we throw in the grindstone. The grindstone will never stop grinding. Rather, it always requires something to be placed within. Among people, and this is the conclusion, among people are those whose grindstones grind grains, wheat, and produce flour, which they as well as others will benefit from. So you put good things into that grindstone, eventually good things will come out. For an example, look at what Imam Ibn al-Qayyim is writing to us. He had good thoughts. Eventually, these thoughts came out. So if we have good thoughts, good actions, things that people will benefit from come from that as well. So we'll have, salah will come out, recitation of Quran will come out, donating to charities will come out, helping the poor will come out. All of these actions which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam encouraged will come out. However, most people grind dirt, stones, and sticks and other materials. That's what Imam Ibn al-Qayyim is saying. Most people out there, they're just throwing dirt in there. They're just throwing stones because you have to throw something in there. So they don't care. They're just throwing anything in there. Whatever comes their way, they're just tossing that into the grindstone and not choosing the best things to put in there. You have that choice. You can search and find good things to put in there and throw it in there, or you can just get the job done, throw whatever's nearby, rocks and dirt. Thus, when the time to bake bread arrives, the reality of their dough will be made apparent. This is what Imam Ibn al-Qayyim is saying at the end of the day. And what is that? What is he referring to? He's talking about Qiyamah. That day will come when we will finally see what type of bread we made. So we are ultimately just grindstones. We're grinding away at all these different things. When the time to become baked comes, then some people will see that I just had dirt. It's not turning into bread. What's happening? And then there will be some with some beautiful bread. Some people will have some, a person will have a bakery. He'll have all the beautiful things and, he'll be proud of himself. On the day of judgment, this person will be proud of himself or herself because in dunya, they struggled and they controlled those thoughts, did not let them develop into evil thoughts, and ultimately did good actions. And those people who just did not care, they just threw dirt, stones, sticks inside that grindstone. On the day of judgment, they'll see it and be like, oh my God, what did I do? I wasted my chance. So this is a great comparison that Imam Ibn al-Qayyim has given us, and he gave us some really amazing advices. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to practice upon these advices, to understand the levels of our intentions and thoughts, and really take it seriously. Because these things that come into our minds, a lot of ulama say that, either the angels, when you have good thoughts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give you those good thoughts, or an angel can bring those to you. And bad thoughts can come from your nafs, or they can come from shaitan. So whatever it is, if it's coming from our nafs, then that tells us my nafs is messed up. It's feeding me bad ideas. Why is it doing that? Or if it's coming from shaitan, that's even more scary. It's even more alarming. And if good thoughts are coming to us and we know that either Allah is bringing them or angels are bringing them, that is very amazing. If a good thought comes to us and Allah brought it to us, then is there anything more amazing than that? Allah's giving you a good thought. Excuse me. Allah's giving you a good thought, so because He wants you to do a good action, or an angel brought a good idea. So that's really amazing. A scholar said once that good thoughts and bad thoughts should be treated like good guests and bad guests. Our mind is our home. So we allow good guests to come. When they come, we treat them with honor, dignity. We give them a lot of food. We give them whatever they want. We want them to stay. And when they want to go, we say, please don't go, stay longer. I'm really enjoying your company. I'm really having a great time. So please stay. That's a good thought. And then a negative thought is like a bad guest. We should treat it that way. A bad guest comes. We did not want to see this person. They're coming in with the foul stench and they're just causing a lot of difficulty for us. And we just can't wait for them to go. Obviously, we're not going to show them that type of generosity. So this is how we should treat our thoughts. A good thought comes, develop that. Realize that it's coming from Allah or the angels. Try to develop that thought so that it can turn into a good action. If a negative thought comes, realize what's happening here. Either my nafs is talking to me and my nafs is spoiled, and that's why it's giving me that negativity, or it's a shaitan that's coming to me, a jinn or a shaitan that's coming to me and is giving me this evil thought so that I can ruin myself. And remember, shaitan is man's worst enemy. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to realize this, practice upon this, and ultimately earn His pleasure and really focus our niyyahs towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.